Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also support the show by visiting thebittertruth.info, and you can subscribe on Patreon or buy some cool stuff. And you can always listen to the show for free on Spotify and iTunes and Podcast Addict and all the places that we listen to these things on. So I'm really happy today. I've got special guest, interesting background. Despite having gone to Liberty University, she is a constitutional public policy scholar. And I think once you hear her point of view, you're going to go, why the hell did she go to Liberty University? So Toni Pron, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Hey, so let's talk about, how you ended up at Liberty a little bit and kind of, what you got out of it. And so, like how you're here now.
Sure. I started at Liberty when I was 25. My daughter had just been born. I was a single mom. I recognized that being a single mom with not very much to offer in terms of career, I didn't have many skills to speak of, that I had to find a better path for my daughter. I was the daughter of a single mother, and I struggled a lot in my youth, and I recognized that I needed to provide something more for her. And I have a lot of very conservative family members that have ties to organizations like Liberty University, and they were familiar with it. They recommended it to me. And that's how I ended up there.
Did you fight it initially, or did you just sort of, you kind of already knew what it was, right? So you weren't like,
I was a little caught off guard. I wasn't aware that it was a Christian university, which did catch me by surprise, although I should have known better. But I was really trying to follow whatever lead that I could that would get me where I wanted to go.
Okay.
And that's how I landed there.
Okay. So now what now your focus is constitutional law and public policy?
Yes.
And then what are you trying to get moving forward with that? Are you trying to work with groups, or what are you trying to do with that now?
Well, right now I work in nonprofit, and that's probably where I'm going to stay. Government work is quite bureaucratic, as everyone knows, and that process can be quite frustrating. So I've found a niche in nonprofit work. A lot of it has to do with legislative influence, so policy influence, trying to advocate for individuals who need that help and that leverage in the policy arena. Okay. Right now I'm working with an organization called The Realm of Caring, and feel free to check them out if you'd like to, but they work in the CBD industry, and there's a lot of advocacy that goes on there.
Nice. Okay. So in your travels, and obviously being, at Liberty, they're not big fans of the separation of church and state, right? So being there and, getting to where you're at now, how was that process for you?
There were a lot of struggles, I will say, when I don't have the mindset of the conservative. There were times where I found myself at odds with what they were teaching me, but I will also give them credit because in there, especially in the master's program, they really emphasize something called the sin-crime distinction, where they say the church has its place and the government has its place, and they are not the same place. And so they do emphasize that a separation of church and state does have to occur in order for the way that they view it is that the hearts and souls and minds of man cannot be governed by human entities, but their actions can be. So the government is there to govern the actions of mankind, whereas the church is there to oversee the heart, mind, and soul.
Okay. All right. Well, that seems kind of reasonable. I mean, I'm not,
somewhat, yeah.
Yeah, somewhat, right. So when we were talking a little bit before, and it's just such a big subject, but you're kind of a big fan of the idea of returning the country to what you think is a constitutional origin. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah. So let's jump into that a little bit.
I look at that. I look at the Constitution, like we spoke about, through the lens of the men who wrote it. And what I had mentioned to you was that they were trying to escape tyranny by the government and tyranny by an outside entity, which was the church. So they had these two bodies of societal influence and essentially rulemaking that was governing their lives completely, that was far too involved. And so they were attempting to write basically a set of rules to govern the three rights that Americans have. It's life, liberty, and property. They wanted to ensure that those things never were infringed on by those that govern, those that oversee society. And there's merit to moving back towards that and governing less. And I see that in a lot of ways that needs to happen. I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine who had some ideas about how we could revamp the government and our voting system. And he wanted to restrict the rights of lobbyists. He's thinking in terms of like big pharma, right? These people who society knows don't have the best intentions for people. And that might be true. I don't want to dive into that too much because it's a pretty in-depth topic. But what I expressed to him was that liberty there's a, what is it called? The paradox, the liberty paradox, where you can't have freedom without some of the corruption that we have. They coincide. There's no way. If you start to restrict the liberties of one person, that balloons and it continues to submerge the rest of the liberties of others. And then everybody gets swept up into the tsunami of having no rights. So it happens very quickly and rapidly. I see it happening all the time in government now, especially in policies that are made with our polarizing presidents. Each one of them seems to be more polarizing than the next. And they put forth legislation that's just stripping rights left and right. And I see that becoming a snowball effect.
Well, okay, but then this is the issue too. On the other hand, you also have regulation versus a subversion of rights, right? The Patriot Act. The Patriot Act does nothing to help the average American. All it is a big, gigantic surveillance act that if anyone had balls in 2001, they would have taken it to the Supreme Court and sued and got it overturned because it violates the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of a technicality, right? I remember last summer when
it's quite problematic. Yes.
Yeah. I remember last summer when Donald Trump was pulling his crap in Portland and these rented vans were showing up with guys, right? And everyone's freaking out. And I'm like, well, gee, Obama did that at Standing Rock. Y'all didn't seem to mind then. And by the way, who signed that into law? George W. That's, and then I had my little right-wing friends saying to me that, oh, well, that's the law. Well, the law is wrong because it violates
just because it's the law doesn't make it right or ethical.
Killing Jews in Munich was legal in the 30s. It wasn't right. Right. So this is where I take umbrage with the argument a little bit is that, I think, because the libertarian generally is like, oh, no, we've got too many regulations. It's subverting our rights. However, human beings, unfortunately, as we have seen in the last couple of crashes economically, why Roosevelt signed in the New Deal and Glass-Steagall in 1933, because of the rampant deregulation of the banking system in the 20s. Those guys ran roughshod. And you had banks commingling investments with public funds, the whole 9 yards, and then they crashed in the 20s, just like we had the crash in 2008. And Clinton had barely deregulated Glass-Steagall and the banks in 1999. 10 years later, we have a massive crash. And again, with the pandemic, we have another one. Capitalism fails on a spectacular basis regularly. But regulation, I don't completely agree with you that regulation, it's like subverts our freedoms. There's some regulations that are stupid. And then there's some regulations that are like, well, no, we need to run a check on the banks. We need to run a check on lobbying.
I can't argue entirely with it because you have very good points. Not every law, not every regulation is going to be an infringement of liberty. I do see that there's some regulations that concern me. Going back to what I had talked about earlier was the regulating lobbyists. He also, my friend who I was speaking with, he also brought up making it illegal for organizations corporations to donate money to politics. I like the idea of transparency and possibly restricting the entities that can donate to politics. I like transparency a lot in that regard. But what I expressed to him, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is that when you regulate the Hobby Lobbies and the Walmarts and the Liberty Universities from donating money as that entity, you open the door for backdoor donations. So that's when the Jerry Falwells and the Walton families and the Jeff Bezoses suddenly have these really beautiful bonus structures, and they take that money and directly funnel that into a politician's pocket. Well, how do you regulate that? You can't. That's the truth of it. You can't, because if you start telling an individual whether or not they can donate money to the politician that they support, well, now you're infringing on that individual's right to do that. And then if you and then he brought up that they also donate to organizations like nonprofits that then send the money off to the politicians. And I said that nonprofits have the benefit of the First Amendment, just like an individual does. And that's covered by that First Amendment. If you start taking those rights away, then the good guys hurt too.
But then it gets into all that Citizens United stuff. And a nonprofit is a corporation.
That's a whole...
No, it is. That's just what it is. You're a person. You're a person. And if Jeff Bezos wants to, but then it's even more it's even more transparent though. If Jeff, because you can follow the money tree, right, to Bezos or to whomever. And if you can
try to.
Well, yeah, but
they can go through other entities like what is the? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. The financial industry has lots of ways that these people can donate money without having a face to it, and nonprofits get money that way all the time.
Sure, absolutely
through these funds. Yeah.
See, but this is why we won't have this. We're not going to have it, because the Democrats and the Republicans, we have to first of all get rid of a duopoly, which is what we have. And anybody who likes to think they're on the right or on the left, I got news for you. If your crap is gays, guns, and abortion, you may be on the right or the left on those issues, but your party votes 95% of the time with the oligarchs and the money guys. You mentioned big pharma a second ago. Since the 1930s, we have given those people $1 trillion.
That does not surprise me. I wasn't familiar with the number, but I knew that they were getting a lot from us that they shouldn't be getting.
It's a shit ton of money. If they get it, I have no problem with them getting it, but then we should have our drugs just discounted ridiculously low. Absolutely. enough for them to make a profit. There's no reason why they sell a $20 pill in Australia for $700 here. Other than they're deregulated. They can do what the hell they want. So this is again what I'm talking about. And so like as far as the the ramifications of overregulation and the campaign donation thing, it can't be done enough. They hung bankers in Vietnam. I'm a big fan of hanging bankers, by the way. So like the guys during the crash in 2008, those speculators got hung.
That was
in Iceland, the minimum sentence was 10 years. They sentenced like 40 guys to jail.
As they should have been. They should have been put away for what they did to people, knowing they were predatory.
Yeah. And here we don't do that. And here we don't have anything close to anything like that. Even jail time. I mean, maybe hangings too.
They're quite protected. Yes. Yeah. And they're protected because of liberty. And the concession here is that I have particular stances on what I would love to see happen. In a perfect world, this is what I want to see. And I guess the place where what I want and what I have learned come and clash against one another is what can happen versus what will happen versus what I want to happen. And so you've mentioned a few times you're not very fun at parties, and I would have to say that I'm not either, because I get into these conversations with individuals and they have these opinions about this is what should happen, this is what should happen, and there is not a one size fits all to policy. And it's also not black and white. That's something that a lot of people think about policy is like abortion is black and white. It should be illegal or it should be legal, and there's no repercussions on either side of those beliefs. When in reality, there's a ripple effect of each. And so you can, and people do it all the time. You shouldn't be writing legislation without considering all of those possible ripples, or as many as you can, right? There's going to be unforeseen things. But the way that I'm not fun at parties is when I tell people, that's nice that you think that way, but that's never going to happen.
Right. Well, and that's the challenge though too, is and I mean, and this is going to sound kind of judgmental. It's mostly just a judgment. I'm not being judgmental, but I just don't think people can go more than a couple of levels past what they, if you scratch too much, they get pissy.
They do. They get upset.
They get real pissy.
asking questions. I had a family member once that told me I was being disrespectful because I was asking questions. And I told her, disagreeing with you is not disrespecting you. Those are not the same thing.
Right. Calling you a fuckhead is disrespectful.
That's disrespectful.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. But saying that maybe the thing that you're thinking isn't going to work, that's not disrespectful. Especially when it's coming from someone that you love, right? Like that person's not trying to be disrespectful. They're trying to have a conversation.
We don't do that anymore. And so that's the challenge. That's the challenge. And that's the challenge with the Constitution, for example. I mean, to me, about 30 years ago, George Carlin had this great joke. If you think the Constitution is supposed to be about laws, no, they're recommendations. They're laws. They're laws
not followed at all.
they're laws for us. Right. But if you're rich and you own the country like the top 100 people do, the recommendations, I
read something once that said that most laws are just obstacles to rich people. So it was put in the context of a rich kid had double parked in front of a store and he just left it there and he got a parking ticket. And he didn't care because he just paid the parking ticket and went on with his life.
Sure.
But for somebody else, that would be devastating.
But to your point a second ago, when you're talking about, there was one side or the other and so black and white, people can be so black and white. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go down the abortion rabbit hole. I mean, I got my little theories about that. I think we should.
That's a whole thing too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I just think we should just tell the church go fuck themselves, do it the first trimester, and then split the difference. And just leave it alone. And it's like, but God, no. God didn't say anything. God didn't say anything. No, God didn't say.
They have they're of the mindset that it's murder and then God did say something. But the truth of the matter is that the government has absolutely no right to ask anybody a question about what they discussed with their doctor. Yeah. Period.
That was Roe v. Wade, by the way. That was the substance of Roe v. Wade. That's why
privacy.
That's right. It could have been about an appendectomy. And it could have been. And it could have been tried on that because the abortion was nowhere near Roe v. Wade. So when the pro-lifers freak out about it, it's like kind of going, we've got to overturn it. Really? You're going to overturn the whole privacy issue? That's the basis of HIPAA.
That's where you go. That's where my liberty paradox comes in. You want to take away the right to have privacy in the doctor's office. Well, now everybody's privacy has been stripped away because of this one thing. If you didn't know that I was going into the doctor's office to have an abortion, then it wouldn't bother you because you wouldn't know it was happening.
Well, and it should be your fucking business anyway.
It's none of your business.
And it's these very same people, oldest argument in the world, but it's the oldest argument in the world because it's goddamn true. So, it's the same thing where these very same people do not like welfare. They don't want any free education. They're trying to get kids on vouchers and all that shit. Right. Mm-hmm. But so the kid's born and that's cool, but we're going to fuck him out of a job, have him go to the Middle East and kill people for a living. Mm-hmm. And then when he comes back, if he's not dead, maimed or insane, maybe we'll give him money for school. And this is the kind of the point I was gonna make a second ago, kind of back to your, the black and white argument. I don't think the Constitution is an immutable truth.
I would agree with you on that.
I just don't think it is. I honestly think, great construct it's been a great experiment-ish, right? We've got a lot of bodies along the way in this experiment. It was written by a bunch of old white guys, basically oldish, middle age, who wanted to make sure that they're going to set the table for themselves.
Landowners.
And if you were a white guy and went bankrupt, you couldn't vote. I think that was until about 1828 or 1832. So it was like for the first 50, 60 years in this country, if you were a white guy who lost land, you could not vote. Yep. So it was no women, no blacks, no Indians, nobody could vote except for old white guys. And then the Electoral College was like this temporary thing that they set up that they never got rid of. So I get kind of like, it's not this immutable, and they go, well, they'll think like it's like the Bible. And I'm like, well, the Bible's not immutable.
No, you have how many different denominations created from one book? Uh-huh. So if the Bible's not immutable, then the Constitution sure as hell isn't.
That's right.
Right? That's a fraction of the age of the Bible. You're going off of that. So I'm a scholar of the Constitution, but I would agree with you that it's not flawless. I think that part of the human experience is that we're not infallible. That's part of the beauty, I think, of our lives, right? So if we're going to be infallible as the natural state of things, then we're not going to be able to put forth absolutely perfect policies or legislation or even the Constitution. It's a great foundation, sure. You build on that and you evolve and you progress and you move forward. And sometimes we wouldn't have any of the amendments if everybody in history thought that it was the end all say all. There's amendments because it wasn't.
Yeah. And until the 13th Amendment, I mean, shoot, the thing hadn't been updated in 60 years. Mm-hmm. You know, the last amendment was 1804. The 12th Amendment was 1804. Mm-hmm. And then it went over 61 years between the 12th Amendment and then Lincoln with the 13th Amendment. And then we just started, you know, just making a habit of it every now and again. And we had the 14th Amendment and all this other kinds of, but I guess this is my question too. Like, you know, so when you're saying that you want to kind of get back to the original Constitution, you know, you're one of the few people that I've met that actually has a flexibility with that, because, you know, I don't think it's immutable. And when I hear constitutional originalists, which seems to be a term in the legal profession, you know, it's always guys like Brett Kavanaugh or, you know, or Neil Gorsuch. And, you know, well, originally a black guy was 3/5 of a person. So is that the originalist you're talking about? I mean, this is where we've made changes. So to get back to it, or, you know, according to who? Because apparently we don't care about habeas corpus. 2011, Obama gutted that when he renewed the NDAA. So habeas corpus is gone. Posse comitatus, which was kind of a kick-ass little thing in the 1870s, that's gone. You know, we have the Patriot Act, 4th, 5th, 6th Amendments, basically gutted. We have an over-militarized police force. You know, we learned nothing from like Hong Kong. They had riots last summer. You know how many people died in Hong Kong? Zero. Apparently that leftover British policing works pretty well. Maybe we should send our guys to Britain instead of Israel to learn how to be fucking cops, so they're not parading around like Mad Max, Thunderdome jackboots and beating the crap out of people with riot gear. So let's get into that. So, I mean, so when you're talking about, you know, getting back to that, like, what, I don't want to make you pick and choose parts, but like, I mean, what are you talking about specifically?
I want to look back to when the men who created the country, you touched on it, that they were white landowning men, right? Mm-hmm. They had a very specific set of privileges that a lot of people did not have. Mm-hmm. What I see is not, I know that that you have to kind of consider who wrote it. I'm considering more or less what the goal was. They wanted freedom from oppression. They wanted to not be told who they could worship and when they had to worship and how they were supposed to worship. They wanted to be free from being told how they could spend their money, being taxed insanely on that money that they made. Arguably, you know, they had slaves and whatnot. And what I love about the Broadway play Hamilton is that they touch on that. They make a little joke about how they weren't the ones making their money, or they weren't the ones making their product. It was the slaves that was making the product. They were making the money off of that. I feel like that I need to mention that. I understand that that's the case.
But they also turned Hamilton, who was like this, you know, Fed
into
treasury,
somebody worth on a pedestal.
Like he's fucking JFK or something. I'm like, dude, this guy was a right wing. It's to me, if I saw some FOIA thing come out 10 years from now that Hamilton was a CIA plot, because I already think it is. I would 100%. Oh, dude, I would totally go, I knew it. It's like every time something happens and you kind of go, that looks like bullshit. 10 years later, some reporter gets a Freedom of Information Act and he gets a memo or 20, you know, and it's like, you know, this is a fact. The Department of War, then the OSS and the CIA and the Defense Department has had a hand in over 2,000 films and television shows since 1915.
That doesn't surprise me.
Since 1915. Doesn't surprise me at all. And if you look at any interviews with guys like, for example, Francis Ford Coppola, his experience making Apocalypse Now compared to the guys that made Top Gun, very different experience.
I'm sure.
U.S. Army told him to go fuck himself. And he had to use the Philippine Army, who had our stuff that they bought, and they were fighting rebels in the South. So it happened quite a few times where Coppola's got a shot coming with helicopters, and all of a sudden there's a general on set, and he's got the walkie-talkie going. He's calling the helicopters away, and they're not giving Coppola his $3,000 a day back. So they got we'll do it 2 days. Sorry, we got to go get these guys. That was his experience making Apocalypse Now compared to the Top Gun thing, where the Air Force was lockstep. It was a recruiting film.
All about it.
Mm-hmm. All about it. Anything you want. F-16s, right, you got them. You bases, you got them. Motorcycle on a base, no problem. You know, Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis banging on a wing of an airplane, no problem. I didn't see the movie, actually I did once, like a million years ago, and I hated it. So, and people hate when I say that. Oh, my favorite films. I'm like, well, I'm a darker.
it doesn't have to ruin it for you. Like Hamilton's got some sweet beats. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or not, but it's got some sweet beats. My daughter loves the music. I think it's got some history sprinkled in. If you can recognize that any fictional, any piece of work like that is going to come dramatized. It's a melodrama.
Sure,
it's not intended to be your history lesson. It's intended to entertain.
But it's nice that it's got like at least some of it in there, like, maybe 30%.
That is nice. Yes.
It'd be good, like it would be good. It's like if we see Custer at Little Bighorn, we don't expect him to be kind of like the good guy. It's like he was there to go kill a bunch of Indians and it backfired. So
it didn't work out. Yeah.
Right. Didn't work out very well. So, but no, but
so
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Let's come back to what you're saying. So you could consider me a constitutional originalist in that I agree wholeheartedly that you can narrow down the rights of man to the 3 rights that they've been given: life, liberty, and property. I think those are solid as hell. My take on it, and this was the theory that I wanted to use for my thesis, was that these rights are built upon one another. Right. And so if you look at the amendments, they are all sectioned off under one of these 3 rights. The right to liberty covers the freedom of speech. That covers the protected statuses I believe that's the 14th Amendment, the protected statuses of being like a woman or your age discrimination, all of that stuff is protected under that. That's all liberty. When you look at property, some people argue that this is liberty, and it's not worth arguing really. It's one of the 2, right? It's either liberty or property. The right to own guns, the right to bear arms, it's the Second Amendment. I look at that as right to property. But when one of those here's what I think. I think that they're tiered. So there's a hierarchy here. The number 1 right that everyone has is the right to life. But if you go down from there, if you use your gun to murder someone and take the life away from another person, well, now you not only should lose your right to have that gun, you lose your liberty by going to prison, but ultimately your life is preserved because that's the highest level of right that you deserve to have. And these people aren't being killed on death row. They're being held until they die. But that's the consequence of losing your liberty because you took someone's life away.
Right.
So when you use one of the lesser 2 rights to infringe upon the rights of others, you begin to lose those. That's how I see it. That's how I recognize that. I'm not sure. I'm not any of our founding fathers, so I could never speak to what they actually were thinking when they wrote this. But when I look at it, if we went back to those as rights and we recognized that property is the least of the rights and that liberty is secondary to life and that life is the utmost, I think that we would do a better job regulating, legislating, all of that than we're doing right now, because we firmly believe that someone's interpretation of liberty is the absolute, always perfect interpretation. And we can go back to the abortion conversation with that, right? Is that somebody out there believes that no one should have the liberty to speak to a doctor about what they want to speak to a doctor about. So I'm going to take that right away. Well, that's not fair just because that's your opinion. But if we go back and we square up with those 3 rights, I think we do a better job. And what happens is politics is hell-bent on making people who follow them, politicians, are hell-bent on making them forget the rights of others. Forget that person has these rights. If you don't do what I say you need to do, that person's going to take that right away from you. You're not really taking it away from them. They're going to take it from you if you don't take it from them first.
Right.
So that's how legislation gets written these days. And it's fucking everything up. And that's why everything's so convoluted and so difficult to manage, and why there's so many consequences, foreseen and unforeseen, that come from legislation, because those rights aren't considered before it's written. It's all whatever I can do to get you to pay me money and vote for me is what I'm going to do.
Well, it's always about expediency. I mean, and I don't have a romantic view of politicians.
I would hope not.
At all. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to go, oh, yeah, this president, that president. But then I got older and I was kind of going, yeah, most of them have been just a bunch of fuckheads. I mean, the few good things that one or two would do, like a Teddy Roosevelt or an Eisenhower, for every one or two good things that they would do, 3 or 4 or 5 really fucked up things.
Absolutely.
And so, you look at Eisenhower keeping us, getting us out of Korea as soon as he got in. but and because he didn't want to spill blood again and spend a ton of money again, like we did in World War II. So then he went covert. Everything was a covert operation.
Yeah.
We went to Central America, we went to Iran, we went everywhere. And just, so I don't have this romantic view of politics or politicians. I think most of them are C- brains of dubious ethics, frankly, as Chris Hedges says. Is you look
that's the best way to look at it. Yeah.
You look at them. No one is smart enough to outrun their psychology. Period. And every time I see some of these, they're just not. And every time I see like an AOC, get on her little video and do her bullshit, or Bernie or Donald Trump, I'm like, you're telling us it's like watching Ted Bundy interviews. Like even before he admitted it in 1988, because he was like trying to stay alive. You look at his interviews and he's telegraphing, exactly who he was. But I want to ask you this really quick, because I got a little hung up when you said life, liberty, and property. Mm-hmm. And I'm not against owning property. It is what it is. And I know we stole this land. We came in and conquered it, and we fucked over a bunch of people. But how is property an immutable right along the lines of life and liberty, especially when the legal definition of property is theft anyway?
Wow, that's an interesting take.
That's a nice way. That's a nice way of saying that. But
no, you know what? I've never heard that take before, and I try to be as open as possible to other opinions, because I don't know anything by any means. I tell myself that all the time. I say I know nothing.
Pants. You're a smarty pants.
That's the best way, I think, for me to combat the mindset of I know everything, or I know this. You can never convince me otherwise. As long as I'm telling myself I know nothing, I think I'm in a good place.
Sure.
So hearing that from you, the legal definition of property being theft, that's shocking.
Well, I mean, think about how we think about it's like I bought a car, 2 owners down, but originally it was stolen. The VIN number was scratched off. Right. And now I own the car, but it was a stolen car.
So technically it's not your car.
Technically it's not my car, but I did pay for it. So it's like, when we were kids. Yeah. Well, actually, I'm older than you are, so I don't know if this is when you were a kid, but when I was a kid, we used to have these pictures of George Washington, these old like school little like paintings in the history books, and George Washington as a young man was a surveyor, right? And he's got dark hair. He's a young guy. He's wearing the knickers, the colonial knickers. He's got a vest, and he's got a telescope.
I remember. I think, yeah.
You remember that? Yeah.
I can imagine the image. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And so he was a surveyor. Well, that was a nice way of saying that he basically surveyed land that didn't belong to him, mapped it out, got a deed for it, recorded it, and then sold it to another guy who then hired a bunch of poor white guys to go shoot Indians.
Mm-hmm. Right? This land was made for you and me, but it was stolen from them.
Right. So this is my, hot take, as you would say, on the property issue. Like I said, I'm not against property. I got friends with, I live in this country. I get it, but I'm just simply saying that to have that as a right along the level of liberty and life, that's kind of my question.
I'm not sure if I consider it to be along the level, because like I said, there's a hierarchy to those rights. In the space in between, I suppose I've never really considered the space between those rights. How much of a hierarchy is it? How big is that gap between these rights? If I'm looking at it the way that you're talking about it, I'm going to put it in the perspective of owning a gun. And the reason I'm going to do that is because that's a very popular topic in our country. And I think that there's substance to that argument of being able to own a gun to fight against a tyrannical government, right? But I guess if I put it in terms of it being theft, and it doesn't matter to me to own any property necessarily as much as life and liberty do. But when I look at my own ownership, the things that I have, I worked hard to purchase the car that I have, and it wasn't stolen. I can assure you that. So I worked hard for that. I think it's more about, this is something that I've achieved, and I deserve to have it as the fruit of my labors. And I suppose you could actually categorize that under liberty.
Right.
Rather than have it be a standalone right. There's argument to be made that it could be a function of liberty.
Well, see, and then back, and we got a few minutes here, back to your argument about the Second Amendment, to fight against a tyrannical government. When have we ever seen that?
We've never seen that.
We've got a tyrannical government, and we have not ever seen that. In fact, the Second Amendment was designed, a well-regulated militia that was slave patrols and Indian patrols.
Yeah, it was not pretty.
It was, and this is what we had before we had a standing army, right? Because the first army was pretty much a volunteer army, and they got paid a little something, but they were basically fighting for freedom. When really, kind of like now, they were fighting for old white guys to not pay a lot of taxes. Kind of what it was. I mean, yeah, the king was a prick, and I get it, and so they had some cool stuff in there, but I don't think the Second Amendment is necessarily this immutable thing. I'll give you an example. So I believe in owning guns. Do I need an AR-15? Do I need a hand grenade because I want one? Right. And
I would argue no.
Right. I mean, it's like I got friends armed to the teeth, and but they gave me this shit all the time. I used to think that way till about 4 or 5 years ago. I had this come to Jesus moment, no pun intended, where up in Dallas, because I live in Austin, Texas, and up in Dallas, there was a Black Lives Matter protest going on, and the cops were there and everything, and this was just when Texas approved, because we have concealed weapon carry here, but this is right when Texas approved open carry. Okay, so you had all these pot-bellied, leather-vested guys with baseball hats carrying their rifles on their shoulders. I'm American. I'm going to show you.
Oh, that toxic masculinity for you.
I like to call it asshole. I like to call them assholes.
That's true. That's good.
Everyone's like, "Oh, you're being a toxic male." Oh, you mean I'm being an asshole? Yeah, I'm being an asshole. Call me an asshole. Don't give me some fancy pants psychological term that's not mean jack shit in 2 years because political correctness says we can't say asshole, but we can say he's a toxic mask. Fuck you. It's like, no, I'm an asshole, or that guy's an asshole. So they were all trotting around, and this guy showed up, and he lost his shit, and he started shooting at cops. And so what happened was all these guys with the armed guys, they heard gunfire. They started running, not being trained law enforcement. They started running away. Well, it gave the shooter an extra, the estimates I saw were anywhere from 3 to 4 extra minutes. He ended up killing like 8 cops and put like 4 or 5 in the hospital because the shooter would run, or not the shooter, but the guys with the guns were running. So cops would go, "Oh, there he is." So they chase him.
Don't know who's who.
Yeah. So you had 8 or 9 cops chasing this guy down. They ground him, they cuff him, they smell the gun. He hadn't fired it. And he's like crying, "I didn't do anything." And of course he's a white guy. So, he gets to live, but, which is a whole nother show, but literally that woke me up because they didn't do the thing they said they were going to do. They didn't protect anybody, right? They didn't jump in front of a family of 5 and go, "Don't worry, citizen, I'll protect you." They didn't do any of that RoboCop shit.
The good guy with the gun can stop the bad gun argument is.
It's happened a couple of times. It's happened a couple of times. Like that church shooting we had in San Antonio could have gotten a lot worse. It could have gotten a lot better if the guy actually had his bullets in his fucking gun and didn't have to go open his gun vault and take an extra 3 minutes. If you're gonna have a gun in the house, have your gun in the house with bullets. Like I'm gonna put it in the crate, and then you run like that Bill Burr joke. You're running around, trying to assemble the weapon as the guy breaks into your house. It's like why even have a gun? But this is my point in all of this is that argument to me falls flat because I've seen this happen a ton of times. The Vegas shooter, all the country guys that were playing that festival had bodyguards with guns, and they all ducked under the bus because their first thought was, if I pull out a gun, the cops are going to think it's me.
Sure.
Right. And so this is where the guy that likes to talk the crap, the tyrannical guy, I call bullshit, because as soon as the over militarized police force comes down your street and they destroy your neighbor's house and burn to the ground, you're going to throw your shit on the lawn and assume the position and do what they tell you. So that's
exactly true. Yes.
This Red Dawn fantasy, which was not a documentary, by the way. Red Dawn was a fictional film, kind of like Star Wars. Okay. It didn't happen. The Russians didn't invade. John Wayne was an asshole. He was never in World War II. All these iconographic fiction characters that, it drives me fucking crazy. Barely anybody knows who Eisenhower is, or Patton, or anybody that really got shot at. Right? They know these fantasies. But this is my real question though, is we should own it. We should be able to own guns. Sure. But then at what point? I mean, the NRA, when it was first started in the 1920s, it was a shooting association. They taught you how to use firearms. They were like a kind of like the Boy Scouts almost. They
They
were
served a decent purpose at one point in their history.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and until they sold their soul to the John Birchers in the 70s. But yeah, it was like they in fact, they got the Tommy gun banned in this country.
Well, you can't train people to shoot guns if they don't own guns.
Right, but they realized that not everybody needs a Thompson submachine gun.
Yes.
So they got that banned. But you could still own a 38. You could still own a rifle to go hunting. You can still own a shotgun. But you don't need a Thompson submachine gun.
If you use that gun and you kill somebody, it doesn't matter if they were breaking into your home, you could be liable for the murder of that person. And you're the one that ends up in prison, even though that person was breaking into your home.
Well,
there's all kinds of.
Well, you're a lawyer. You tell me. There's all kinds of legal fancy pants shit when you like shoot a guy.
Absolutely what could happen. Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, but I'm not talking about, I'm talking about, does the average American need an AR-15?
I don't think so. That's opinion.
Sure. And what's it design? What's its primary function? What's its design? Is it sport? I mean, I got friends that hunt. You know, they give me venison all the time.
It's an assault rifle. An assault is a military term.
Right.
You're not going to go onto it. What's the reason? You need to shoot 20 people at one time, or as quickly as fucking possible. You don't need that to shoot a deer because you're hunting. You don't need that to shoot even when they're throwing the what are those things called? The discs that go into the air. I know what they're called.
Oh, skeet shooting.
Thank you. Yes. When they're doing that, you don't even need an AR-15 for that shit. It's not for sport unless you consider war a sport. Mm-hmm. So I do think it's difficult for me to wade through all of that opinion.
See, but these, as we start to wrap up here, these are the seas that you sort of swim in here when
absolutely.
You know what I mean? It's like absolutely like First Amendment violations. I mean, you know, I wanted to get into this more, but you know, maybe we could do it on another show.
Sure.
But I don't think that the social media companies have a right to censor people.
They have no right to do that. And there was I mean, yeah, that's totally another show. I've got a whole lot to say about that.
Well, the primary reason, you can correct me because this is a legal assumption on my part. Mm-hmm. The primary reason, you know, the main argument that, you know, the so-called left likes to make is, well, they're a business. They could do whatever they want. Well, then the gay cake baker people can not sell a cake because it's their business.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's 100% true. Yes.
So you can't have the argument both ways. And then the number one reason is because all of these social media companies, Amazon, Facebook, Twitter, they all have CIA and NSA contracts, which means by extension, they are now an arm of the government, which means now they are in violation of my 1A rights. Randomly, because goddamn Rush Limbaugh had 15 billion Google hits. He was never deplatformed. He was never censored. I'm in Facebook jail for another week. I got a 30-day sentence. You know?
Oh, that's right.
You know, it was just like
they've gotten a lot more strict with that.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh got away with murder.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Rush Limbaugh would read the obituaries of AIDS victims to the tune of "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places." And he thought that was funny. Right. And he had like in the advent of, he'd been around for a while, but in the advent of the internet, he had 15 billion Google hits by the time he died. They helped make him a star. Yeah. Right. But if you speak in favor of the empire, you get away with it. If you do not, you know, if you're like doing if you're doing the typical red or blue talking points, you will never get censored. You'll never get banned. If you love Biden and Trump is an orange mean man, you know. But if you talk about him having ships in the South China Sea and Biden continuing that policy, now you're going to get in trouble. Mm-hmm. Right. Anyway, but we got about a couple minutes here. So, you know, I'd love to have you come on and talk about that, the First Amendment. But so where are you at now with some of this, with some of these processes? What are you trying to get done with all of this now?
I think I'm going to take what you've talked about in terms of property and mull it over because it's valuable to consider. I still feel very strongly that going back to the root of the rights that we have, all of the amendments are rooted in a right: life, liberty, or property. Mm-hmm. What I find to be quite shocking is that most Americans don't know that those are their three rights. They actually believe it to be life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, because most people were forced to memorize that in grade school. And so they think that the pursuit of happiness is their right. But the truth is that's impossible to govern, like we talked about. So that's actually not your right. You are not entitled to be happy. Deal with it. That's what I have to that's the message I try to convey to people, is that happiness is not your God-given right. And it's impossible to achieve as a God-given right. Anyway, that's a whole
the trick was always the pursuit of it. You have the right to pursue it.
Which is a faction of liberty.
Right. And so I never had too much of an issue with it because it was the pursuit of it.
Right. But then you get the people who say, well, this makes me unhappy, so it can't be allowed. And that seems to be a common argument in politics is, well, that pisses me off, so I'm going to take it away. That's not really fair. Not that it's not fair. It's not constitutional.
Well, see, and those people, I think the legal term are cocksuckers. And that's why... that's why they think like that, because that's who they are. And this is where I get kind of snotty and where I'll stand up for me and mine, because the idea is, no, you are dumber than me. We are created equally, and we are all equal under the law. Cool. I get it. I'm equal under the law. You're equal under the law, but I don't think you think. So not you, but I mean, just like, so how about we
I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah. I'm how about we kind of drag the idiots across the finish line like we've done throughout the entire history of this country, where only 3% of the population was cool with the revolution. Only 3% of the population were cool with women's suffrage. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten the vote. Only 3% of the population were cool with civil rights. Only 3% of the population were against the Vietnam War. And it goes on and on and on and on. It goes on and on. It's a small, minute population of people that are cool with things, or want to get things done, and everyone else is cool with it. And then when it's done, they're like, oh, hey, this America thing, that's a great idea. Glad y'all fought that war. Boy, that king was an asshole. Yeah, now we're better off, or whatever. Oh, gee, women get to vote now. Oh, wow, they can get a credit card in their name without having to have their dad sign for it. That we were doing that till the 1960s.
Yeah, that's pretty shocking, isn't it? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she fought against that. That's one of her initial pillars, was fighting against the fact that a woman couldn't get a home loan without her husband's permission. Right.
It's like just shit like that. And so we, you finally kind of crossed the finish line. Back then, you could not have interracial marriage, right? And then and now we do. Nobody gives a shit. And not, until fairly recently, you couldn't have gay marriage, and now we do. And it seems to be like nobody cares. It's like, I get back to the Jeffersonian thing all the time, especially with the Christians. Just shut the fuck up, mind your own business. Whatever you do between here, your nose and your finger is kosher. And
that's actually something that I learned in school, and you might find this interesting, is that I was taught in my education through Liberty University that the church governs believers. There's no gray area there. So if I'm not following the church doesn't govern me. I don't have to follow their rules because I don't believe in their rules.
Right.
So what the church is, I can just say it as the church, because it is the church. What the church is doing is now they're trying to take away liberties of other people who don't follow them because it pisses them off that they have that liberty.
That's right.
That's not how the Constitution works.
That's right. And that's why I'm a big fan of separating. We got freedom of religion in this country, but I got freedom from it.
Amen.
And for anybody that wants to give me shit about it, me and my brothers or whatever, we came up religious, and until we weren't. I haven't set foot in a church except for a wedding or a funeral in like 35 years, and it doesn't make any rational sense to govern on religion. If you want to legislate on religion, then let's legislate on the Grimm's fairy tales or Aesop's fables.
You run into so many problems. It's a very problematic way to govern. That's when you end up with the Salem witch trials all over again.
100%.
It's pointing the finger at somebody and saying, you thought this thing, and now you deserve to have this, and this happen to you. Well, you don't know what I'm thinking. That's fucking impossible.
100%.
So no.
100%. 100%. Well, hey, listen, Toni, we got to start wrapping up here. I'm really glad you came on.
Thank you for having me.
It was fun and lively, and I just enjoyed it so much.
I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here.
If you didn't live so far away, we could braid each other's hair and talk about American Idol.
We'd get along swell.
Swimmingly. We'd have like some pies and tea. It'd be great. Well, folks, my guest has been Toni Pron, and we've been talking about constitutionally stuff. And so, again, support the show if you will. I appreciate it. You can listen to us for free on all platforms. Thebittertruth.info is the best place to find everything, so you're not searching around. But if you do download the show on Spotify, iTunes, etc., you'll be fine. And as always, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.